Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're starting our press conference. We have 50 minutes to ask the questions to our honorable guests. Please, Mr. Prime Minister of Guinea, Mr. Ibrahima Kassoure Fofana, our speaker today. Mr. Joschka Fischer, Foreign Minister, ex-Foreign Minister and Vice Chancellor of Germany. Ms. Robin Wright, Senior Fellow at the U.S. Institute of Peace, Distinguished Scholar of the Woodrow Wilson Center. Mr. Justin Eufolin, Chief Economist and Senior Vice President of the World Bank since 2008 to 2012, and Howard Dean at the National School of Development, Beijing University. And Dr. Vladimir Yakunin, Chairman of the Supervisory Board, DOC Research Institute at Doctor of Political Science, Moscow State University. And myself, moderating the press conference, Head of Communications of DOC Research Institute, Grigory Levchenko. We have translation in the hall. If you wish to listen to the press conference in French, this is number 2. If you wish to listen in Russian, this is number 3. Number 1 is for English. Well, just a couple of words now for the speakers. We have the press, we have around 40 journalists attending the conference from all the continents. We have even people from Australia and from South America, which pleases the organizers. We have a large core coming from Africa, namely from South Africa, from Guinea, from North African states. We have journalists from India, China, Europe, and Russia. And I was just following the tweet, the social networks feed of the opening press conference. I saw like 20 tweets, and I saw that tens of thousands of people were following the open channel in direct broadcast on the internet. So that's perhaps the same symbol of that's the multilateralism interested to many people. Okay, please, when you ask questions to our guests, name your media and name yourself. And here we go. The first question. Who will be for the first question? Oh, yes, Helsinki Times, please. And please tell whom you address the question and name yourself.
Alexis Kouros from Helsinki Times. My question is primarily to Mr. Fischer, but others could jump in and answer. You mentioned that Trumps come and go, and that's true. You have, as you said, there are other examples as well. But isn't the problem, the main problem at the moment, the weakness of Europe? Because we are seeing that when a Trump comes in the US, how Europe is so powerless in many different issues, in military, economic, political. One example is the sanctions against Iran, and the European countries, with all of their power and cooperation, are simply unable to counter Trump's effect because Europe is so dependent, and the whole financial system of the world is so dependent to the US.
Well, you are describing the facts correctly. When we talk about multilateralism, it's always principles, interests, and the reality. It's, someone said it's a battlefield. It's not a given. And the reality is that the US was the major power pushing forward and driving the international system after the Second World War. Including the great idea of the United Nations. This was a creation of the US. Eleanor Roosevelt was the major promoter of this idea, and the Atlantic Charter negotiated in '41 between Winston Churchill and FDR was the foundation of the UN. So we shouldn't forget that the US was playing a crucial role multilateralism was an essential part of the Pax Americana, which was came out of the Second World War. So these are the facts, and you can regret the weakness of Europe, but again, Europe is as it is. You can't, this is not a question of wishful thinking. So you have to deal with the facts. And one fact is that the US is extremely powerful. But in the 21st century, we will be challenged by questions where even the most powerful nation, or even if we think about G2, China and the US, the two most powerful, and some more, wouldn't be enough to address these issues. Climate change, it will change everything if we will feel the effects. But the US cannot do that alone. China cannot do that alone. And therefore, yeah, your description is correct. The weakness of Europe is a fact, but we cannot overcome this weakness within a short period of time. Europe is also in a complicated situation, to use a diplomatic word.
I want to add one thought. The US Senate may get it wrong this weekend, but in Europe, the Nobel Committee got it right. They've just awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
To whom?
To Nadia Murad, a victim of Yazidi victim of ISIS rapists, and Denis Mukwege, who is a doctor in the Congo who treats victims of sexual assault. Europe, I think, gets it. The problem is that there is a lack of leadership on many continents that helps drive this global phenomena, to drive multilateralism. We are missing the kind of thinking that helped bail us out after World War II. After, you know, the United States has missed several opportunities, particularly after the end of the Cold War. So for those of you who are really interested in the subject, Pew has a new poll out this week about leadership and looking at who's admired around the world. It's a survey of 25 pivotal countries. And it shows that among the world leaders, President Trump comes in lowest. Angela Merkel comes in the highest, followed by Macron, then Xi Jinping, and then Vladimir Putin, and Trump is the lowest. What's really interesting is that the numbers of people in the world who are in Europe who believe the United States, that the US president will do the right thing, namely Trump, has been almost halved in the last 2 years since he took office. 70% of the world, of the 25 countries polled, do not have confidence that the United States will do the right thing. But 70% believe that Trump will not do the right thing, but 50% believe that the United States is still the moral compass of the world. So that's the gap in some ways is the hopeful thing about the future, but we do have to deal with today's reality.
Sorry to interfere. We have some questions coming us through social networks, and I would address one random question of those who discuss opening panel to Dr. Vladimir Yakunin. It's formulated sharply and interestedly. Dr. Yakunin, is a real multilateralism achievable? Isn't it the world has always been able to be uni or bipolar? How would you answer to this question?
To my mind, it is a little bit strange question because, you know, through the whole history of mankind, it was always like that. We are just inventing terms. Now we call it multilateralism, but, you know, in the ancient period of time, nobody knew this type of the words, but people were different and they were living differently. They, you know, worshipped different gods. If we are talking about contemporary time, I suppose it was obvious that during the panel session, you know, despite all the spectrum of the opinions, different questions which were raised, different type of the presentations, finally, everyone came to the ground that, multilateralism, this is the only alternative or an alternative way to settle the most essential issues of today, which you also were referring to. And from this point of view, I suppose, despite some kind of scientific researches, what it and how it can be named, we should understand civilizations are different, people are different, traditions are different. What we have in common, we have the mutual house. The name of this house is Earth. So polluting somewhere distant areas will reflect it in the United States of America or in Russia. And if, in some country, 25 women were raped, it is not just the case for this particular society in this particular country. And I can further discuss whether it is possible, whether it is appropriate, whether not appropriate, to come to some place. Once I was participating in the conference, and very well educated, very well positioned Europeans in conversation with the representatives of Africa, they were open-heartedly saying, listen, we should introduce to you what should be done for prosperity of your particular continent and your country. And the reflection was, listen, maybe we do that, and you will help us to do what we consider is essential for the African continent. That is multilateralism. That is the understanding of the wishes, intentions, and targets of the others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have many questions, but the first in the queue was the question from our African colleagues. Please, Crystal Odison.
Hi, Crystal Odison, the Africa Report. My question is to the Guinea Prime Minister and also Mr. Joschka Fischer. You mentioned that the challenge for Africa is to make itself heard, and it's not happening at the UN Security Council. So just from your side, why do you think this is happening and what should be done? And Mr. Fischer, as a foreign minister that's traveled the world and of course Africa, do you think we'll ever see in your lifetime Africa getting some sort of voice at the UN Security Council? Thank you.
Nous avons une situation assez difficile.
We're in a very difficult situation.
Mais l'Afrique s'organise.
And Africa is getting organized right now.
En attendant d'arriver à ce
But
consensus
before
pour
we
le
can
Conseil de
reach a
sécurité,
consensus for the Security Council of the United Nations,
ce que nous essayons de faire,
what
c'est de
we
construire
try to
le
do is
partenariat
to build a partnership
entre les Nations Unies
between the United
et
Nations
l'Union africaine
and the African Union.
sur des thèmes
And we
essentiels
focus on the themes that are essential to us,
qui concernent ce multilatéralisme, notamment
namely
le changement
multilateralism,
climatique,
climate change,
le terrorisme
terrorism,
et les missions de paix.
and peacekeeping
Par exemple,
missions.
nous avons observé que
We have observed
ce qui manque
that
aujourd'hui,
what is missing today
les Nations Unies interviennent en Afrique, mais pas de
is
manière
a clear
structurée.
intervention, because when the
C'est
United
quand
Nations
il y
intervene
a
in Africa, it's not a
des
well-structured
problèmes de crise,
intervention.
quand il y a
It
crise
is
dans
only
un
when there
pays,
is a crisis
le
in
Conseil
one
de
specific
sécurité
country,
est
then the Security Council
convoqué
reacts,
et les moyens sont appelés.
and
Et la difficulté de dégager les
it
moyens
is really difficult to
met en
engage
difficulté
the means,
la résolution des crises.
and that is why it is so
Ce que
difficult
l'Afrique
to
essaie de faire
solve those
à
crises
l'interne
and to find a
est
resolution.
de s'organiser
So
pour
what
trouver
Africa
des
is
moyens.
trying
Vous
to do
avez pu,
right now is
vous avez pu
to
noter
get
que
organized within the
nous
different
sommes en
African
train de
countries. You
pousser
have
fort
probably
pour,
noticed that in the
en
past
termes de ressources,
month,
pour
we are
bâtir
trying to
la source de ressources pérennes
find a
pour
sustainable
l'Afrique sur la question de
source
sécurité.
of resources,
Avec
especially
la
when it comes to
taxation sur les
security,
volumes de
with
transactions
the
extérieures de
taxation
0,2%.
of
Le problème est
0.2%.
posé.
The problem is raised,
Là, les décisions sont en cours
and the decisions are going to be taken
et
very
nous
soon.
espérons que ceci pourrait
And we
aider au
hope
moins à
that
faire intervenir
This is
l'Afrique
going
comme
to help Africa
un ensemble à hauteur de 25%
and to
sur
make sure
chaque situation de
that
crise qui se
Africa
créerait
will
sur le
reach a
continent.
level of 25%.
Alors, ce
and
que
then
nous
be
souhaitons
able
est
to solve the
que
crisis
du
in
côté des
Africa.
Nations
So,
Unies, ce
on
que
the
l'Union
side of the
africaine est en train
United
de
Nations, what
négocier
we are trying to negotiate with the United Nations
est
right
que
now
de
is the following.
manière structurée et pérenne,
We
le
want
budget
to
des
have a
crises soit défini.
sustainable system, a
Pas
sustainable
de manière
budget
ad hoc comme c'est le cas
for
aujourd'hui. Il y
crisis
a
and not
crise, on
an
dégage les ressources.
autocracy. We don't
Ça
want
rend
to have
difficile
a
l'équation.
decision that is made depending on the
Mais
crisis
nous
that is
devrons
happening
être
right now.
d'accord tous
We
que
want to have something very
pour
sustainable in place
un monde de paix et de sécurité,
because we are
il n'est
we
plus
are
facile
thriving
ni
for a
souhaitable
world in
d'ignorer un
peace and
continent,
security, and I
l'Afrique,
think a
qui a
continent
son mot
the
à
size
dire
of
parce
Africa
que
cannot
nous
be
comptons en
ignored
nombre, parce
because
que nous
we
comptons en économie.
have a great
Les
population, we
tendances
have
pour
a great
les
economy as well,
décennies à venir, la croissance
and the trend
dans le monde
for
sera
the
quand même
coming
africaine. Et puis parce que
years
nous
is
comptons
going
sur
to be
des
investing in
sujets
Africa.
d'intérêt commun.
And we also have a common
La
interest.
migration dont souffre,
Migration,
le phénomène migratoire dont
this is
souffre
a
l'Europe,
phenomenon that
ne peut
Europe
trouver
is
une
experiencing
réponse
today. And I
sans
think
un
the answer is
multilatéralisme
also
actif
in multilateralism
entre
with
les
Africa,
continents.
with the different
Et il n'y a
countries,
pas,
the
comme le
different
disait
continents.
tout à l'heure le président, il y a
And
pas,
as
je ne vois pas
said,
d'alternative
Our chair
au
earlier, there is
multilatéralisme
no alternative
pour
to
gérer
multilateralism
et régler
to
les
manage
problèmes communs
the
que sont
common
le
issues
climat,
that we are
le
facing,
terrorisme,
climate change,
la sécurité dans le
terrorism,
monde.
security in the world.
Well, I can be very short. Your question was not about Africa, it was about the Security Council reform. And this turns out is extremely complicated. I made the experience to negotiate with our African friends about an African seat, and I have not the slightest doubt that Africa needs in a reformed Security Council a permanent seat. But how Africa will decide this is terribly complicated. By the way, Europe and Africa are sharing the same problem. What will happen to the European seats? How will we find a new form of continental representation? That's more or less the same challenge in Europe and in Africa. And if things are continuously as they are today, I doubt that during my lifespan you will reach an agreement between Nigeria, South Africa, and in the background also Egypt. You will need to have a new kind of continental representation. Otherwise, it won't work. On the other side, it's as longer as the UN is not reformed, as weaker the UN will become. And therefore, I think there should be a dialogue between Europe and Africa about new, fresh ideas, how these representation could be done. We have the same problem, so let's think about it. This would be my answer. But for the time being, I don't see an efficient reform.
Je m'excuse de répondre sur cette question. Nous parlons de principes. C'est vrai que les
We talk
difficile
about principles.
après la
It's true,
désignation
it's
quel
really
pays
difficult
devrait désigner.
to know which country
Mais le
should have a
principe de
seat at the United
représentation
Nations.
du continent,
But
un
maybe having a
continent qui compte,
representation of the continent, a
devrait
continent
pas
that is so
au XXIe siècle
so broad, this shouldn't be
devrait
a
pas être un
question.
problème.
It shouldn't be a problem to have a representation for Africa
L'Afrique
at the
organisée,
United Nations.
les pays dont vous citez,
The countries that you have just mentioned in Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa, they are members of the African Union. So we have to solve the principal problem, and then we can let Africa decide on which country
si
should
nous
be
nous
a
limitons à la
representative.
difficulté de cette
If
désignation sans régler le
if we're
préalable du
stuck
principe
because of the
de
principles,
la
then we
représentation
have a problem.
continentale au Conseil
We
de
would like
sécurité,
to have a continental
pense que nous n'y
representation at
arriverons
the
pas.
United Nations. If we're stuck
Donc,
because
pour
we don't know
moi,
what country
le
should be
principe
the one representing everyone,
devrait être
this is
réglé.
the main issue.
Et puis le soin
And
sera
this is what
laissé
we
à
need to
l'Union
solve. And
africaine
then the African
de
Union
régler ces
can
problèmes de
decide
représentation.
on who they want to send and
Lequel ou
how they
lesquels
want
des
to
pays
proceed, maybe with several
serait mieux
countries,
représentatif
with a
du
rotation or whatever, who would be the best representative of the
Thank you very
continent.
much, Mr. Prime Minister. Shall we continue, please? I know there is a question from Israeli I-24. Yes, please. Please, Elon, proceed.
Thank you. Elon Levy, I-24 News. A question for Mr. Lin. The World Bank recently released an assessment saying that the economy of the Gaza Strip is collapsing and calling on Israel to relieve the strict measures in place on the Gaza Strip. Israel, of course, responds that anything it allows into the Strip, construction materials, will only allow Hamas to rearm and build weapons that will allow it to threaten Israeli civilians. So how do you propose that Israel and the international community try to escape this dilemma whereby anything that helps to support the economic development that the Gaza Strip so desperately needs would also, ironically, end up supporting the terrorist group that controls that strip?
Thank you for the question. I was the chief economist and a senior vice president of the World Bank from 2008 and 2012. So I have left the institution for 6 years. And so it's very hard for me to speak on behalf of the institutions. However, certainly we hope every country in the world can be free of poverty. Every country in the world should have the right to pursue their path for prosperities. And for that, peace will be essential, and respect to each other will be the foundations. And so in terms of, the situation you just mentioned, certainly it's not desirable from both parties involved. And I hope some kind of compromise and a solution can be, agreed from both sides and allow people in the Gaza Strip to be able to enjoy their normal life and also to have the same right for prosperity as their neighbors.
Thank you very much. Okay, next, Benares,
Thank you, Ben Harris, editor of BNE and Telenews. I'd like to come back to the multipolar, unipolar question. Dr. Yakunin brought it up in his opening speech and said that the need for multipolar is necessary more than ever today. And yet we seem to have a clash here in the world between the unipolar view, which is led by the US, which is traditional post-war, its place in the world for the last 40 years, and the rise of the emerging markets, and this multipolar view is being championed most obviously by Russia, but not only the other emerging markets, China specifically, I think, is also on board. And this is leading to maybe a clash of civilizations. I mean, the most obvious example is the showdown between Russia and America, which is manifest in the tensions and what we have now a hot war in Ukraine, in Europe, for the first time since post-Second World War. And I would like to ask the whole panel, but specifically Robin Wright and Joschka Fischer, also you famously clashed with America over Iraq and Europe, where Europe was against that war and Americans pushed ahead on a unilateral basis. And how do you see this playing out? I mean, and particularly in the concrete terms, what are we going to do about Russia? Because Russia's now getting involved in Middle Eastern wars, and it has a hot war in Europe, and there doesn't seem to be any resolution to this problem. Thank you.
And to whom you address your question?
Well, specifically maybe to Mr. Fischer, in so much as he's actually been involved in a clash with the US where Europe and America disagreed. Robin Wright, I'd also be interested to hear how you think that. I mean, America's traditional role as global policeman, but Another example is we've now got Russia, China, and Germany forming a coalition to maintain the Iran sanctions, specifically to bust Americans. And America's now, and UK and France, excuse me, yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. But I mean, my point there is that you've got Russia aligning with Europe, with whom it has a huge problem, in order to dodge US sanctions. This all seems a very confused situation. I don't see how this is going to play out. Thank you.
Well, I don't share your basic assumption. I mean, handing over the defense of multilateralism to Russia and China, I don't buy in. Europe is a staunch supporter of multilateralism. Europe is multilateralism. Without multilateralism, the EU wouldn't exist. So America is moving in a dramatic new direction, unilateralism. It's giving up or actively destroying the American idea of a multilateral world. I think it's against American interests, but this is a decision which has to be made and discussed inside America. It's in the hands of the American people. But multilateralism is the question of Ukraine. It's not a confrontation between the US and Russia. Europe is also actively trying to reach a compromise in negotiations with President Putin. And we shouldn't forget that Europe is united in these questions. France is an essential part. In the question of the JCPOA, it's America, it's the American retreat from the agreement which was found commonly, including the UK. So it's not that this is a new confrontation between China and, on the other side, Russia and America. I don't share that assumption. What we see is a huge disarray in American policies. Yes, but Europe tries to pursue multilateralism because it's essential for the Europeans. And I would predict whatever the outcome of the Brexit will be, the UK at the end, driven by its own interests, will align with the Europeans in these questions.
Is right?
So it's such an important question you've asked, and it plays out in ways both big and small. To take the small, the specific angles, you ask about the Iran deal and the creation of a new financial institution to circumvent US sanctions. That's really interesting because if it works, even in principle, if not in practice, because no European companies are still doing business with Iran, the fact is it is a challenge to US domination of the international financial system. It's a huge development, and it shows the willingness of our closest allies to stand against us. It shows a rift that is as deep as anything in principle. When it comes to multilateral institutions since the end of the Second World War and the creation of these institutions. Stepping back a little bit, I actually think that all the different aspects of the challenges, the friction that we see playing out, really are part of the story of the 21st century and the challenge of globalization. We don't know how to do it. And nations are struggling among themselves about how to get there. We've kind of by default created regional blocks, whether it's for security or trade, and other environment, for a lot of different reasons, to deal with common problems in an age where technology shows how connected we are. But we can't get beyond the identity of who we are. and change, the technological changes and so forth, are kind of moving at a geometric rate, while our ability to cope with them, our learning curve, is arithmetic. There's this huge gap. And as a result, I think that long-term, beyond my lifetime, there's reason for optimism, because you can't avoid globalization. It's going to happen. But there can sure be a hell of a lot of fights along the way that play out in, whether it's within countries, among blocs, as everybody struggles with how do you adapt your identity if you thought of yourself as from a city, a province, a country, a continent, and suddenly we're talking about you have to be something different. And those were the things that from which you got your values and your sense of security. So I think all of it plays out. Everybody's kind of grappling or grasping to have a little bit more to protect themselves, whether it's territory or funding or institutional loyalties or position. And you can place each one of these conflicts in that context. I would just say one thing about American history. The first American president, believe it or not, to cross an ocean was Woodrow Wilson. He went to the Versailles conference, and you know how long he left the United States? It's staggering. He was gone 6 months. And he brought back a deal that he couldn't pass in his own Congress. And as a result of the terms, the next 3 presidents were isolationist. And yet it was the United States that came together and pulled the world out of World War II and helped create institutions. Change is not linear. And in this case, we're on a roller coaster. So this is not the first time this has happened. America is a place where there is probably a deeper schism right now than there has been in almost a century. And it scares me as an American. But it's part and parcel of kind of, I think, what we're facing globally.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wright. Yes, Vladimir Ivановich.
May I follow what Mr. Fisher and previous speaker just mentioned? I suppose it is extremely narrow-minded approach to state that, for example, multilateralism was invented in China, in Russia, or somewhere. It is not true. It is not correct. Or, to blame the United States or Russia for all the atrocities of today's contemporary politics. But what I would like to point out, that actually when we are talking globalization, we have roughly 2 actually global institute of management. This is one you mentioned. This is financial system, dollar-based financial system, and with some exclusions, maybe WTO. That's it. Because if we are talking about United Nations, that is international organization. This is the platform for negotiations, for settlements. But it is very difficult to observe the possibility to impose something due to the differences in the approaches of the members of the Security Council. So those 2 institutes are very essential. And sometimes when we are talking globalization, we are omitting the simple fact again that it is not to be done in accordance with the planning which was prepared in just one country or in one just institution. It is not possible at all. Soviet Union destroyed itself because it was trying to plan the economy just of one country, completely. And if anybody is trying to introduce the mutual or, the one receipt for the settlement of all the issues of the world does not matter. You know, North America, you know, Southern America, Russia, Europe, it does not work. That is the idea of this conference, to try to, you know, to give a new thinking to the essential elements of the critical situations in different aspects of human activity. And, you know, we are not concentrated only on politics or on economy or some aspects of financial system. That's it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ikunin. We have many questions. Sorry, I have several people in the row. I have to give the word them. Please limit your questions to very short remarks, and I would also address to the speakers to limit your answers to not more than 1 minute. We have 15 minutes left. First we go to France, because you were from the start.
Jacques Berredier. I had a question for le Premier Ministre de Guinea. I wanted to know, Africa is in the path of building a common market. I just wanted to know if the European common market will be a good example or a model. I say common market, I don't say common union, because union suppose a very high integration, so an attempt of integration. And I had a very quick question for all the panelists. Our friend Renaud Girard said that we should organize a new conference on security in Europe. Do you think it is achievable to have a new conference on security? And it's not a big risk to have this kind of conference, because I do think that we need some agreements before between Russia and the rest of Europe.
What's the question to all the panelists? Am I right? Yes. To all. Maybe we start with Justin Lean. Okay, the first question to Prime Minister. Okay.
L'Afrique essaie de construire
Africa is trying
un marché
to build
commun,
a common market.
C'est par région
But
pour le moment.
what we want to do
Parce
is
que
to
la
proceed on a
diversité
regional level,
économique
because Africa is very diverse, economically
est si
speaking,
importante qu'il n'est pas facile
and that
d'engager
is why
l'Afrique
it is really
dans un
difficult
schéma
to find
uniforme
one
maintenant pour la
template that
construction
would fit everybody's
d'une union
need,
douanière.
especially if we want to
Vous
create
observerez que dans la
a
région
customs
ouest-africaine,
union.
la
In
communauté économique des
Africa,
États de l'Afrique de
there
l'Ouest,
is
CEDEAO,
the
a réussi
ECOWAS that is working
à se
really
mettre
well
en place.
and that has
Vous
managed
allez en
to
Afrique
implement
centrale,
great work.
il
If
y a
you
la
go to
communauté
Central
de,
Africa,
comment on appelle ça,
you have also a
CDAC,
community.
le nom,
I don't
bref,
remember the name of
c'est
this
des
community, but they're
ensembles
also working
sous-régionaux
on
qui se forment.
trades.
La
And
bonne nouvelle est
everything
que
is happening
le
regionally in
progrès,
Africa.
le
The good
dénominateur
news
commun en termes de
is
progrès de
that
ces ensembles, c'est
we share
la
a
libre
common goal.
circulation des
We
personnes.
want a
C'est
free
devenu une
exchange
réalité.
of people. This
La libre
exists today.
circulation
This
des
is
biens
possible.
est en cours.
And
Et
free
les progrès
circulation
sont
of goods
inégaux
is on its
d'une
way.
région à l'autre.
It's not, the situation is not the same
dans ma
in every
région, la
region. In my
région
region in
ouest-africaine,
particular, in
le
Western
progrès est
Africa,
essentiel.
we have made great
Maintenant,
progress in the
au
past years.
niveau
And
continental,
at the level of the continent,
la démarche vise d'abord à intégrer les économies
what we are trying
par
to do is to
voie
integrate
d'infrastructures
the
communes.
different economies through
Créer
a common
les
infrastructure,
infrastructures
to a
routières,
joint infrastructure
ferroviaires, de
through
manière
roads,
à faciliter
train
le
tracks,
commerce des
to make
transactions
sure
commerciales.
we can also have this circulation
Nous
of
avons
goods.
un agenda d'arriver
We
à
have
ce
a
marché
set
commun dont vous
agenda,
parlez
and we want
aux
to reach
horizons
this common
2063.
market in 2063.
L'horizon intermédiaire avant cela
In
pour
the
la mise en
meantime,
place des ensembles
there is a lot of
régionaux
work to do
et
on the regional
l'amélioration
level,
des
and
indicateurs
we need
de
to
développement en termes
improve
d'objectifs
the
de
development
développement
indicators,
C'est
especially when it
2030.
comes to sustainable
Donc,
development. Our
l'agenda
goal for
est
the
clair pour
sustainable
toute l'Afrique,
development
là où
agenda
nous
is
allons, et le
2030.
deadline est
So
placé pour
this is
2063.
the deadlines that we
C'est
have.
pas un combat
2063.
facile,
It's not
mais
an easy
nous sommes
ride,
dessus.
as you can see it, but we're working on it.
Thank you. And please, other speakers were invited to speak, but please very short remarks, very brief remarks if you have. Vladimir Ivanovich, please.
I'm sorry, to introduce myself as a pessimist because by nature I am optimist. But I don't think it is possible to foresee new conference like it used to be in Helsinki. Just because the simple fact is that today we have United Europe with special rulings, with special procedures. And I don't understand how it can be possible that, you know, inside EU, every country will introduce its own opinion and how it correlates with existing legality of EU. Necessity and possibility for such kind of conference possible, but it will be absolutely different conference to my mind. I'm sorry.
Okay, any other remarks? If no remarks, shall we go to, there was CGT and asking for a question from a long time ago. Are you still there?
Here, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. This is Jane from CGTN. A hot topic around the media recently is about the China-US trade war. I want to ask this question for Mr. Lin Yifu. And do you think who's going to win in the end? And do you think that trade frictions will make China stronger or pay the price of the development? Thank you.
Thank you very much. No one wins in a trade war. It's a lose-lose. It's a lose-lose for every country. And certainly China hope to avoid that. And China will be opening the door for negotiations. But we hope the result of the negotiation, once agreed, will be upheld. We hope not what happened in the past. Every time we compromised and we reached an agreement, but the next day, the agreement was just put aside to ask for more, and so we don't know what the counterpart wants. But I think that's bad for every country in the world. And we hope rationality will prevail because trade is a win-win for every country.
Well, that's true. Next question, yes, you wanted it very much.
My name is Abdel Sattar Barakati Mabo from Egyptian TV. My question is, Rhodes Forum is the 16th this year, and every year it is better than before. But this time I didn't see any time for anyone from Arabic country. And we speak about peace and security, so must we have from Arabic country. And my question also to Dr. Yakunin, how we make the dialogue of civilization to help to solve the problem in Mid East. Thank you.
Firstly, representatives of Arab countries were always participating, as you know, in this forum, and they were always, invited. So far, yes, it so happened, but you do not see usual faces. But maybe it is due to the very tense situation which we observe now in this region. That's it. It is not, changing of the policy or idea of dialogue of civilizations. As far as how the concept or methodology of dialogue can help to heal the major crises we observe now, but we are talking about that. We are trying to introduce our opinions into the policy briefs. We are trying to participate in the preparation of G20. For example, just recently I was participating in T20 in Buenos Aires, and we were talking and considering exactly the issue of the development of infrastructure in different parts of the world, with specific focus on African needs, African continent's needs. So I suppose just to present the platform for alternative thinking, new thinking, and inviting different representatives of different societies to introduce their opinion. That is the mandate of this forum in the first place. But of course, we are interested that the result of the discussion in the form of policy briefs could be used by the actual political institutes, but it depends not on us depends on the quality, but it depends on their wish to see and to use this expert and scientific approach to settlement of different problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there was one question from Germany, long-standing, and then I give to Simon Schuster, the next one.
Moritz Enders, working for the German television. I got a question for Mr. Yakunin, and it's about if you could give us your thoughts on the role of Russia as a potential bridge country between China and Western Europe and in the Eurasian context. Thank you.
Thank you. There are several concepts of the possible structure of the coming future, and one of the concepts saying that, we will observe on one side globalization as the process, on the other side possible regionalization when the countries which are close to each other by tradition, by the history, by just, kind of business relations, they will try also to concentrate and to present their mutual opinion or mutual wishes in different aspects of their relations. So from this point of view, if you mentioned Russia as the bridging country, then the concept of Great Euro-Asia, which is not belong, by the way, to President Putin, it was firstly stated by President de Gaulle, and I would like you to remember that. It is not made by Russia. But, the assumption that in the century of the development of communications, in the century of, shrinking the distances, it is essential that that kind of collaboration in particular regions should be introduced. And from this point of view, yes, Russia, like Kazakhstan, by the way, could be considered as bridging countries. It is not solo of only Russian Federation. That is, multiple chorus of those countries who are lying in Mid-Asia, Russia, and China, of course, and Europe on different sides of the continent. So as far as I'm concerned, I truly believe that the collaboration in this way will be fruitful, and to my mind this is not alternative to anything, but that is possible additional support for the process of globalization.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yakunin. Simon Schuster, Time Magazine, please.
Thank you. Yeah, Simon Schuster, Time Magazine. I'd address this question to Mr. Fisher and Dr. Yakunin. Just yesterday, the governments of the Netherlands, the United States, and the UK presented evidence of Russian military intelligence launching cyber attacks and other intrusions against very famous multilateral institutions, namely WADA, the investigators of the shooting down of MH17, and the OPCW. What kind of role can Russia play in the formation of multilateral institutions and inside of the current multilateral institutions when it is accused of such attacks with some pretty damning evidence? Thank you.
So essentially, you were the first.
This was mostly a question to Russia. I'm not a Russian speaker.
I am not Russian speaker either, and I'm less entitled to talk on the part of Russian government than the previous speakers, and this is essence of the platform of dialogue of civilization. But being Russian, I'll try to share with you my own assumption of the situation. Firstly, my history is well known. I'm not opening up anything, If there is intelligence, intelligence is doing its job. I don't know whether it was involved, whether not, but this is to be accepted. And according with the Vienna Congress of 1956, if it is legal activity, that is permitted. Diplomats, they are also gathering information other ways. So speaking about this particular institution and the assumption that, two representatives were equipped with something, to eavesdrop into the system or something like that. I don't know if you saw or have any particular reasons to say this is true. Because, it is hardly, for me, being an engineer, just to imagine what kind of equipment should person carry for cyber attack on a well-protected system of this multilateral institution. I just cannot imagine it. Excuse me, because maybe I'm obsolete because, I finished to be engineer many, many years ago. But from the common sense, I cannot understand that. So this is the first part of the answer. And the second part, I suppose any attempt to exclude any country like Russia, any other country, from the process of trying to find a proper settlement in with the usage of the methodology of multiplicity is not correct. It is not right. Governments, this is different. Governments should learn how to hear each other. It is absurd when, this is kind of anecdote when deaf persons and the blind persons trying to, to communicate. Sometimes when I am observing what is going on in real politics, that is exactly the case. Blind and deaf trying to, to collaborate. It is not possible.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yakunin. Before we end, and organizers said that we have definitely to end now. Is any other remarks any of you want to deliver personally to the press? Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Vice Chancellor, Ms. Wright, any remark you want to deliver to the press, specifically something that was unasked or you want to tell? If no, then we will end the press conference now. I know there were dozens other questions. Sorry not to have time to answer all of them, but I think the conference only starts and you will have time to talk privately to all of the speakers. Thank you very much, distinguished speakers. Thank you, journalists.